I never thought I'd have to talk about abortion. That question was only ever something other women had to face. I was pro-life, a wife, a mother, and I thought that protected me, but I couldn't have been more wrong. When I entered the Oklahoma Children's Hospital, I was so sure that my second pregnancy was healthy, I glided into that ultrasound room full of laughs and smiles. I was 12 weeks along, and I couldn't wait to hear what my little guy was up to. Because I'm almost totally blind, I asked my husband to describe the imaging, teasing him by asking which one of us Dallas looked like. But it turns out that the life you expect for yourself can be taken away with something as simple as a knock at the door. "We're back," said the sonographer, her student in tow. The doctor wanted us to get a few more pictures. I was confused, but laid back and exposed my belly again. "Can I wipe the jelly off now?" I asked as they were finishing up. "It's best to leave it on, just in case the doctor wants us to come back again." My husband tried his best to reassure me that everything was fine, but I knew. And I wasn't laughing anymore. The next knock at the door was the maternal fetal medicine specialist, whom we had not been scheduled to see. I tried my best to put on a brave face, but as he explained the ultrasound results, the world started to slide out from under me. There was a mass so large in my son's abdomen that when my husband saw it on the screen, he thought it was his brain. Not only could no doctor in the entire prenatal diagnostic center diagnose it, none of them had ever seen anything like it. The MFM hit me with a line of questioning that felt like an interrogation. "Mrs. Davis, have you been out of the country lately? Does your family have any history of genetic disorders? Have you been sick at all during your pregnancy? Do you have a fever? Have you ever had COVID?" But all of my answers were no. With hardly any information to go on, the MFM said this meant that the mass could be anything. Bowel entanglement, Down syndrome, and miscarriage were all serious possibilities for my son. When my husband asked if the ultrasound machine could be wrong or if there was any way the mass could go away on its own, the word no felt like a blow. I asked about next steps in developing a treatment plan, but the doctor said that depends on whether you're going to continue with the pregnancy or terminate. "I don't do that" fell out of my mouth so quick it felt like a muscle reflex, but it didn't even register with the doctor. He just continued on, as if my words didn't matter, as if my baby didn't matter. He wanted to rush an amniocentesis at 16 weeks, even though he admitted this would yield compromised results, but he said it was important for me to have answers sooner. He then offered termination again. I agreed to the amniocentesis, but once again made it very clear abortion was not something I was going to choose. When the doctor left, we were sent to the waiting room and told to sit tight for our actual appointment. I wasn't offered a consult with palliative care. I wasn't offered time with an on-site counselor. I wasn't even offered a private room to cry. I didn't know what to do, so I locked myself in the public restroom and sobbed. My husband and I cried, and we prayed, and we cried until someone knocked on the door. This should have been the end of my abortion discussion, but it wasn't. A couple weeks later, a woman from the prenatal diagnostic center called me to go over the preparatory information for the amniocentesis. It involved me pausing my anticoagulant medication so a very large ultrasound-guided needle could be inserted through my abdomen and into the amniotic sac, collecting fluid for genetic testing. When I asked about the miscarriage risk associated with the procedure, and asked if the genetic results would be in any way helpful for finding a treatment for my son, she said she wasn't prepared to talk to me about that, so she'd have one of the doctors call me. When the second call came through, it was the same maternal fetal medicine specialist from my first appointment. and what he said shocked me. I asked the same question, why am I risking a miscarriage if the genetic disorders you're testing for are not treatable anyway? Because abortion gets more expensive the longer you wait. I tried once again explaining to him that abortion was not what I wanted. Was there any way these genetic results are going to change the plan of treatment for my son? Yeah, he said. If the test comes back with something like trisomy 13, those babies don't live that long anyway. So you would never do an emergency C-section for them. I didn't know what to say, so I asked, so the amniocentesis is not going to be that useful for me then? He sighed. I guess if you can promise me you're not going to have an abortion, then there's no need for the amniocentesis. But why don't we keep you scheduled anyway, just in case you change your mind? This is the moment I realized he didn't see himself as my son's doctor. Dallas was the problem, not the patient. I had already guessed correctly that the Oklahoma Children's Hospital was in the business of selling abortions, but I never thought it would be something their doctors pushed and pressured women into. I took my son there because I wanted him to have the best care, and I felt utterly betrayed. I knew I couldn't change hospitals. Because of my 2 blood clotting disorders, I was already forced to go to the most specialized in the state. So what could I do? All I knew to do was file a complaint and pray that this would be the end of the abortion discussion. But it wasn't. At 16 weeks, I received another ultrasound. And of all the MFMs in that hospital, guess who entered my room? Well, I'll get straight into it, he said, because it's been made very clear to me that you don't appreciate chit-chat. After hosting an interdisciplinary meeting with the best specialists in the entire state, the team still had no diagnosis for me. The doctor wanted to run another blood test and offered termination again, amongst threats of diagnosis such as cancer, mental retardation, and stillbirth. It was almost as if he was escalating the possible outcomes just to see what would convince me. This time, my husband tried to convince him that abortion was never something we would accept. But it still didn't stop him from throwing over his shoulder, you know, if that blood test comes back positive for likely brain damage, you can still have the abortion. Don't worry. I was so angry. All I wanted to do was scream back at him and say, I don't care if your test says he's going to be a school shooting pedophile. He is my son. All of these opinions were coming at me because of a picture of my son I couldn't even see. And now I had to wrestle with the fact that a useless printed photo of him was all I might ever have. Fear and grief were suffocating me, and I didn't know what to do. I felt bullied, I felt harassed, I felt hopeless. What was I supposed to do when the one hospital meant to save babies like mine had already decided they were going to kill him? Pregnancy is one of the most vulnerable times in a woman's life. We need compassion, empathy, and support, and we are extremely susceptible to manipulation. The plan to murder my son had one crack in it. I knew too much. I knew my son wasn't a clump of cells. I knew having an abortion wasn't like ripping off a Band-Aid. I knew he was fearfully and wonderfully made, with a beating heart and ears that were starting to hear every word that doctor said about him. And I knew who to call. Hope Pregnancy Center, how may we help you? I didn't think about my words before I dialed, so they just all fell out in a big mess. When's it illegal to get an abortion in Oklahoma? I must have startled the receptionist because she paused. I mean, I don't want an abortion. My OBGYN, he won't stop asking me if I want one. And I thought maybe when it was illegal, he'd have to shut up. Maybe I should transfer you to our nurse. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. As you can imagine, the nurse slowed me down quite a bit, got the full story out, and what followed was a complete download of rights and laws that helped me put together a solid plan to fight for my son and to fight for myself. When you're getting bullied, it's like a part of your brain shuts down. You think, maybe they're right, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I do deserve to be treated like this. But it turns out all I really needed was someone to say, no, you deserve so much more from your doctor, and your baby is not trash. Thanks to hope, I found a lot of strength that day. I finally made enough pushback and made enough noise that I was promised that doctor would never speak to me again. More than 2 years later, the chapter on my son's health is closed. May 4th, 2022, my son was born at nearly midnight under tornado threat with non-serious liver calcifications that, contrary to everything we were told in that first appointment, have completely gone away on their own. Sometimes God answers prayers in ways that you don't think possible. Now Dallas is a feisty, red-headed, perfectly healthy 20-month-old. He loves Hot Wheels, hiding from his blind mommy, and blowing kisses. And he requires no treatments and no follow-ups. 60% of mothers who receive my son's prenatal diagnosis choose abortion, even though 90% of these babies require no medical intervention. I never would have understood this before, but after the way I was fear-mongered and harassed, I can start to see why. I wish that the miracle of my son's birth meant that the trauma of my experience was over, but I'm still wrestling with the emotional aftermath. Because what that doctor didn't know about me was that every time he used the word termination, I didn't hear his sanitized term. Not only did I know exactly, in graphic detail, what abortion was, I knew the name of the clamp that would have been used to rip my son's limbs off. Every time I entered that hospital, I felt under attack, wondering if the same hydraulic table I was being asked to lie down on had been used to end a life just the appointment earlier. During one of my third trimester appointments, I remember discussing the likelihood of my son needing immediate liver surgery after his birth, when the doctor stopped mid-sentence. "I'm so sorry, these lights," he said. "What?" I was confused since I'm blind. And he said, they're flickering. We've had maintenance in here so many times. They've replaced the bulbs, they've changed the fixture, they've checked all of the wiring, and no one can figure out why this room won't stop flickering. It's creepy, we agreed. Something must have happened here. So many argue that the abortion discussion should be left purely between a woman and her doctor. It's not a political issue, they say. But what if the woman finds herself in a situation like mine, forced to fight against her doctor? Who's left to fight for her? More than 60% of women report feeling coerced or pressured into their abortions. I've spent so much time trying to puzzle out if the Prenatal Diagnostic Center would have made more money charging cash for my son's outpatient abortion than billing Medicaid for his birth. Too many think that the fight for life is over after the reversal of Roe versus Wade, but this couldn't be further from the truth. It is true that after almost 50 years of horror, the decision of Roe is finally dead, but its ghost still lingers. It started as an infection in our judicial branch that spread, legally unchecked, until its misjudgment of basic human morality poisoned our entire society. Our country moved from safe, legal, and rare to abortion anytime, anywhere, for any reason. And now we are a patient gone septic. Because Roe didn't just transform our legal system in 1973, it devastated our culture. It cleared the path for opportunistic men to regard women as nothing more than vessels for pleasure, knowing full well that any mistake of fatherhood could simply be undone with a little pressure and $400. It pitted mothers against their children, as we were told things like, "You'll never get ahead with that thing sucking at your breast." It turned doctors into butchers, as the same hands used to bring forth life in one room were used to snuff it out in another. Just a decade later, we would be so removed from the sanctity of human life that we would begin seeing human beings as products, manufactured in laboratories. I myself am conceived this way, in glass, left to the microscopic scrutiny of a fertility clinic as they decided whether my life was worth it or not. I likely only stand before you today because my health challenges had not yet been made apparent. My siblings, however, were not so lucky. I will never even know how many I had because they were discarded like trash. A science experiment gone wrong, not a brother or a sister whose names I will never know. They weren't wanted, so they were destroyed. It is a painful subject in my household, my mother still haunted by the grief of those decisions, but when her infertility was exploited, when the only information she received was from the same industry selling her the treatment, and when no one was allowed in the discussion besides her and her doctor, who was there to protect her from the regret? When fathers, mothers, and doctors are all incentivized against life, what would we have other than a culture of death? About 7 years ago, I remember a somber conversation I had with a man whom I won't name. He grew up in a broken, drug-addicted household and wondered far too many times if there would be food to eat. When he was still a young boy, his grandmother said to him that she had not been happy when she found out that his mother was pregnant with him, and she told her to get an abortion. Not fully understanding what his grandmother meant, he said, "But you would have missed me, wouldn't you?" "Actually, no," she said, "because you never would have existed." I'm still taken aback by the callousness of that woman, but the most harrowing part of the story is that when he was recounting it to me, I could hear in his voice that he believed her. He didn't think his life mattered, and he didn't think anyone would have missed him. What I often want to go back to that moment, because what I didn't know how to say at the time was, "But I would have missed you, and I would have grieved you, even if your own grandmother hadn't." Because that's who we are in the pro-life movement. That's why each one of us is here today. We're the ones who miss the over 63 million lost to Roe. We're the ones who remember the children that were never ours. Because even if their own mothers can't grieve them, we do. There are so many moments in each of our lives that were meant to be touched by someone who's no longer here. I grieve the cousin that wasn't there to remind me to be brave the first time I rode Space Mountain. And I grieve the sibling that wasn't there to help me rescue our sister when she almost drowned. Who do you grieve? Max, Destiny, Lee, Hope, Christopher, Amber, Daniel, Sarah, Michael, Ebony, Roy, Chloe, Samuel, Ashley, Eric, Melissa, Zion, Jasmine, Bryce, Gracie. We never knew you, but you're still missed. I never thought I'd have to talk about abortion, but in memory of the ones we've lost, I will never stop.